world where the real pirates are running nations and basically kissing the rear ends of corporations, and that's the problem. Right now, the Steve Irwin is in the Red Sea. It just came from Australia and will go through the Suez Canal in a couple of days, and I'll meet it in southern France, where it will be joined by our other vessel, the Gojira, which has now just left Madeira. It had come through the Panama Canal from Australia, and the two of them will come together. The Gojira, by the way, is Japanese. It means gorilla whale, but in English it's called Godzilla. So I couldn't resist that name. Just for the headline alone in Tokyo, well, Godzilla stops whale fleet. But anyway, the Gojira and the Steve Irwin will meet in southern France, and we'll go from there to the coast of Libya in June. To once again combat bluefin tuna poachers. Last year we were able to cut nets on the poachers and release bluefin tuna, and that was a very successful campaign. And this year we think that the poachers are going to be taking advantage of the chaos of the war in Libya to go into those waters, so we will be there to once again intercept them there. And then both ships, the Gojira and the Steve Irwin, will go up to the Danish Faroe Islands to once again oppose the slaughter of pilot whales there, which in fact, in my opinion, is far worse than the killing of dolphins in Taiji. Our vessel, the Bob Barker, is in Australia and will be out of dry dock soon, and we'll be heading up to Palau. Last month I signed a very historical agreement with the President of the Republic of Palau, and Sea Shepherd will now be officially enforcing their laws against poachers in the Palau waters, because they don't have the resources to do that. Now, the interesting thing about that, as soon as we signed this document, Japan sent a delegation to Palau to tell them they could not work with eco-terrorists like us. And the president said, well, that's too bad. We're going to. And so Japan said, okay, we'll give you a very expensive patrol boat, and we'll give you the money to run it if you don't work with Sea Shepherd. So I told the president, take it. Then we'll go on to the Cook Islands and offer them the deal, and maybe they'll get a patrol boat. Then we can go on to the Marshall Islands, and then we could get Japan providing patrol boats all over across the South Pacific. So it's a win-win situation either way. So we're working on that. And again, I said if the Japanese whaling fleet returns, we will also return to the Southern Ocean. Now, we get called lots of names. I'm getting called eco-terrorist so much it's starting to become rather ridiculous. My answer to that is, look, arrest me or shut the hell up. It's getting really tiring being called a name that you can't back up. Sea Shepherd's never injured anybody. We've never killed anybody. We've never been convicted of a crime. We haven't even been sued. So how can we be eco-terrorists? I can get on a plane, I can fly anywhere in the world. So it's just a bunch of name-calling. Then they started calling us pirates too, but I don't have any problem with that. I like that. That's why we have our own Jolly Roger. Because if you go back to the 17th century, it wasn't the British or the Spanish navies that shut down piracy in the Caribbean. The reason being is all the politicians were accepting bribes from the pirates, and piracy flourished. Not much different than the way things are today. And but piracy was shut down by Henry Morgan, a pirate. So if you want to stop pirates, you need pirates to do it. And the great thing about being a pirate is we don't have bureaucrats and lawyers telling us we can't do what we need to do. And so we go in there and enforce it. Now, the other charge, that we're a violent organization. This is what Greenpeace is constantly attacking us. Sea Shepherd's violent. We're always violent. We're not violent. We're about as non-violent as you possibly can get. In fact, what I call what we do is aggressive non-violence. Martin Luther King once said that you cannot commit an act of violence against a non-sentient object. Violence can only be committed against a living thing. So therefore, when you destroy a whaling boat, a harpoon, or a rifle that's about to kill something, you've just committed an act of non-violence. If you destroy something that is meant to kill. Now, if you value property more than life, then I guess you could call it violent. But we only attack property used for illegally exploiting and killing marine wildlife. And I find that perfectly justified. And as for probably the world's authority on non-violence, the world's living authority is the Dalai Lama. And in 1985, I had a Tibetan Buddhist monk who came, and he gave me a little statue, and he said, I've been asked to give this to you and put it up on your ship's mast, which I did. Didn't know why, but you know, if a Tibetan Buddhist monk comes by and gives you a little statue and says, put it up in the mask, why not? So, but it wasn't until a few years later that I had the great opportunity to meet with and talk with the Dalai Lama. And I found out he sent it to us. And I said, well, what is it? And he says it's a symbol called Hayagriva, and it stands for the compassionate aspect of Buddha's wrath. I said, well, what does that mean? He said, oh, you never want to hurt anybody, but sometimes, when they cannot see enlightenment, scare the hell out of them until they do. So he understood that was what our approach was. We're intimidating, but we're not going to actually kill anybody. But the most important thing is we can save lives. So in this last campaign to the Southern Ocean, we saved 800 whales. The year before, 528 whales. The year before that, 428 whales. And if we have one message that we want to get across, it's this. If we don't protect biodiversity in our oceans, the oceans will die. And if the oceans die, we die. We cannot live on this planet with a dead ocean. We need the ocean because it is the heart that keeps this planet going. And I've tried to get a new way of looking at things too. And I come up with this, you know, especially talking to young people, is this idea is to envision yourself as being on a spaceship. That's what the Earth is, really. We're a spaceship. We're traveling around the galaxy at 500 miles a second. It's a pretty fast spaceship. But like all spaceships, it has a life support system, and that life support system is our biosphere. It provides us with the air that we breathe, the food that we eat, and cleans up all the messes and all that we make and other species make, but it's a life support system. And that life support system is maintained by the crew on this planet, the spaceship Earth. We are not crew, we're passengers. We're having a great time entertaining ourselves, but we're not the crew running the ship. We're killing the crew that's running the ship. And that crew are the bacteria and the insects and the worms and the fish, those creatures that provide us, and the trees and the plants, those things that provide us with the air we breathe and the food we eat, and make sure that we clean up the mess that we make. And if we kill too many of them, we're going to be in trouble. And a couple of years ago in the US, I made the statement that worms are more important than people. Got everybody very angry, especially the right-wing Republican Christian wackos. But they said, how dare you say that worms are more important than people? And I said it because worms are more important than people. Because worms can live on the earth without people, but people cannot live on the earth without worms. We need them, they don't need us. We need fish, they don't need us. We need insects, they don't need us. They're more important than we are. And we have to understand that if we're going to survive. We must protect them. But right now we're living in what Richard Leakey describes as the 6th major extinction event in world history, and we will lose more species of plants and animals between 2000 and 2065 than we've lost in the last 65.2 million years. That extinction event that we're in now even has a name called the Holocene because we're responsible for it. And how many of those species can we lose before we lose the support system that allows us to survive? If I were to go into my engine room of my ship and I found my engineers popping rivets out of the hull, and I would say to them, what are you doing? Well, we get €1 a piece when we get back to port for these things. And I would say, oh, if I was near responsible captain, I'd say, oh, really? Well, count me in for some of that, and keep doing it. But they're going to pull one rivet too many, the hull's going to collapse, and the ship's going to sink, and everybody's going to die. If you look at every species in the biosphere, there's a rivet in the hull, a spaceship Earth. We're going to pull one rivet too many. And the problem is all our captains, our presidents and prime ministers are all rivet poppers, or they're being paid by rivet poppers. So they keep popping those rivets, and it's all going to collapse. There's very little thought given to the future. What we're dealing with is this thing that I call the economics of extinction, that there's money to be made by driving species into extinction. The bluefin tuna is the best example of that. Mitsubishi, the largest corporation catching and selling bluefin tuna, is already got a 5-year supply of these tuna in their warehouses, flash frozen. They want a 10 to 15-year supply, and they're catching as many as they possibly can. This is a fish that should be on the endangered species list. It's also the most expensive fish in the world. One bluefin tuna, on average, sells for $75,000 US. So with that kind of price on its head, it's pretty hard to protect it. But the more they get into the warehouses, the fewer there are in the ocean. And that diminishment translates into higher prices for the dead ones in the warehouses. And if you can wipe them out, and there's no more bluefin tuna in the ocean, and the only ones left are in your warehouse, you've got $1 million fish and billions of dollars worth of profits for Mitsubishi. And that's all they think about. Short-term investment for short-term gain. They don't care about your children or your children's children or their children's children. It's all about what can we do now to make as much money as we possibly can to satisfy our shareholders now. That is this disease that these corporations have become involved in, this greed, which is destroying this planet. And that's what we're fighting against. Greed and human self-centeredness. And this idea that somehow we're better and greater and smarter and more deserving than every other species on this planet. We like to think that we're the smartest species on the planet. Why? Because, well, we're the ones who are saying we're the smartest species on the planet. And I don't know if anybody's ever taken Biology 101, where you get a picture, they put a picture of a rat's brain, then they put a picture of a cat's brain, a dog's brain, a chimpanzee, and a human. And they say, well, you can see that the brain gets bigger as it goes up towards the human, and there's more convolutions on the neocortex. It's much more complex as we get up towards the human brain. They never, ever put an orca brain or a sperm whale brain up there. It makes us look really, really stupid. And we don't like to look stupid, so we just forget that that brain even exists. The sperm whale brain is the most highly developed, complex brain on the planet, but we just dismiss it. Instead, we spend billions of dollars searching through the universe for extraterrestrial species or intelligence. And if we find that there's a possibility of a bacteria on the moon Europa, they go absolutely crazy while they're wiping out everything on this planet. I mean, this is insanity. It's got nothing to do with, really understanding that on the planet that we live in, the spaceship that we live in. And that's really, I came to this conclusion many years ago when we first went out against the whaling fleets in 1975. And I was with Greenpeace at the time. I was first mate on the Greenpeace vessel. And we came up with this idea to protect whales. We were reading a lot of Gandhi at the time, and we thought all we had to do is get between the whale and the harpoon, and who's going to risk killing a human being to protect, to kill a whale. So we thought that would work, and Robert Hunter and I found ourselves in a small little rubber boat in front of a Soviet harpoon vessel, bearing down on us at full speed. And in front of us, 8 magnificent sperm whales fleeing for their life. And every time the harpooner tried to get a shot, I would maneuver the boat and block his path. And this worked for about 25 minutes until the captain on the Soviet vessel came down the catwalk quite angrily and screamed into the ear of the harpooner, and then he looked at us, smiled, and went with his finger, and we realized right away that Gandhi wasn't going to help us much that day. A few moments later, there was this incredible explosion, and this harpoon flew right over our head and slammed into the backside of one of the whales in front of us. There was a female in that pod, and she screamed. It was like a woman screaming in pain. It took us completely by surprise that they would scream like that. She rolled on her side in a fountain of blood, and suddenly the largest whale hit the water with his tail and disappeared. And this big sperm whale swam right underneath of us and threw himself out of the water, straight at the bow of the harpoon vessel to protect his pod. But they were waiting for him, and they put another unattached harpoon in there, and at point-blank range, the harpooner pulled the trigger, and this grenade-tipped harpoon slammed into the head of the whale and exploded in a shower of blood and gore. And he rolled back onto the water, rolling in agony, and as he rolled about, I caught his eye. He looked straight at me and he dove, and I saw him coming towards us underwater, trail of blood and bubbles, and he came up and out of the water so that the next move was to fall right down on top of us and crush us. And as his head came out of the water and I looked into his eye, that was something that changed my life forever, because in that eye I saw understanding, that I could see that the whale understood what we were trying to do, because I could see the effort he made to pull himself back. Instead of crushing us, he slid back into the sea. I saw his eye disappear beneath the surface, and he died. Could have killed us, and chose not to do so. So I'm personally indebted to the fact that I'm still alive because of that whale. But then I saw, when I was sitting there in the middle of the Soviet whaling fleet, and I said, why? Why are the Russians killing these whales? They don't eat sperm whales. They make sperm oil and spermaceti out of them, which is used for lubricating high heat resistant equipment. And one of the products, or one of the machines that they used spermaceti oil in, was the manufacture and development of intercontinental ballistic missiles. I said, here we are destroying this incredibly intelligent, socially complex, beautiful creature for the purpose of making a weapon meant for the mass extermination of human beings. And that's when it struck me. We are fucking insane. And from that moment, I said, I'm not going to do this for people. I'm going to do it for them, for the whales, for the sharks, for the turtles. That's what I In 1986, we sank half of Iceland's whaling fleet, destroyed their whale processing plant. And I had left Greenpeace by then. I had a former colleague from Greenpeace came over and says, I just want to say that what you did in Iceland was despicable, reprehensible, criminal, and unforgivable. I said, so? He said, I think you should know what people in Greenpeace and people in the movement think about what you did. I said, John, I don't really care. Didn't sink those whaling ships for you, didn't sink them for Greenpeace. Didn't sink them for any person on the planet. But if you could find me one whale anywhere on the planet that disagrees with what we did, we won't do it again. Because they are our clients. And they continue to be our clients. So that makes us pretty much immune to criticism. I don't care what people call us. If people choose to support us, we welcome that. If they choose to disagree with us, we don't care. You know, because we've got a job to do, and that job is to protect our oceans. And in the end, it will benefit the majority of human beings, because the majority of human beings are all of those who have not yet been born yet for the next 1,000 years. They are the ones we are stealing from. They are the ones we are hurting and damaging because we're not giving any thought to them. Our ships fly 2 flags. We're the only 2 ships in the world that fly these flags. And it's a purple and white flag. You can sometimes see it in pictures. And that was given to us a few years ago by the women of the Longhouse at the Kanawaki Reserve at the Mohawk Reservation of the Iroquois Nation. And it's the flag of the 5 nations. And when they gave them to us, they said, we understand what you're doing, and it is in harmony with our philosophy that you do not take any action unless you take into account the consequences of your actions on the next, in fact, on all future generations. You have to look into the future. For what we're doing will benefit children 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now, if we manage to survive. And that's what we really have to understand, is that we're part of a continuum, that everything that's gone before us that affects us now, everything we do affects everything in the future. That is what we have to grasp, that continuum. And it's difficult because humans have this incredible ability to adapt to diminishment. As things become diminished, we say, okay, well, just get on with something else. For instance, 1965, the very idea that you would be buying water in plastic bottles and paying this amount of money for it would be inconceivable. I saw a bottle of water the other day in a hotel for it was $12 in New York for $12 a liter. That's $48 a gallon in a country where gasoline sells for $4 a gallon. So water is now so much more. No, who would have envisioned that? And this is in New York City, which has the cleanest water in the country, so that the water coming out of the tap is actually cleaner than the water they buy in the bottles, but nobody drinks it out of the tap because the corporations, by the way, the water companies are owned by companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. They have convinced us that the water out of the tap shouldn't be drunk and only to drink their water. So they turn something free into a commodity. And we've adapted to that diminishment. We wipe out a fish species, we go to another fish species, and then another one. Adapting to lesser and lesser, until the point we'll only be eating jellyfish, because that's all that'll be left. So this is this adaptation to diminishment, which will really be our undoing. But I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I wasn't an optimist. And strangely enough, in this world, I am an optimist. I believe that there are solutions. And those solutions are impossible ones. But I also believe that impossible solutions are possible. We just have to have the courage, the passion, and the imagination to visualize that we can make these changes. 1972, the very idea that Nelson Mandela would be president of South Africa was unthinkable and unimaginable and impossible. Yet it happened. So I believe that we can find solutions like this. And I also think that we can find that through individual passion That's why I'm against large organizations and corporations and governments coming up with solutions. They never have, they never will. This movement, the conservation movement, the environmental movement, has always been led by passionate individuals. Because of Diane Fossey, we now have mountain gorillas still in Rwanda. Without her, they would have been gone. Because of the work of Baruti Geldekos, she's been protecting orangutans in Indonesia. And you have Jane Goodall and Steve Irwin, so many individuals who have made an incredible contribution. David Wingate, who's a biologist in Bermuda, because of that one man, the Bermuda storm petrel, the cowpow, has survived. It would be extinct now without his intervention. And I can't think of a more noble legacy that any of us can leave, was the fact that because we lived, a species has been preserved. Now when people say to me, you're asking your volunteers to risk their life for a whale, how can you ask something so outrageous as to, are you willing to die for a whale? I find that again a very strange question, because we ask young people all the time to go and risk their life for real estate and oil wells, and we consider that to be a worthy cause. And people die protecting BP's interests in Iraq, and that's okay. I think it's a far more noble endeavor to risk your life to protect a whale or an elephant or any other endangered species, really. Again, it's all a question of how we view these things, how we look at these things. So, and the other thing too is when people say, what are you going to do about this, or what are you going to do about that? My answer to everybody is, what are you going to do about that? I got a call a few years ago from somebody in Scotland, and he said, they're killing gray seals here in the Orkney Islands. What are you going to do about it? I said, I don't know, I'm on the other side of the world. What the hell are you going to do about it? And he said, well, what can I do about it? So anyway, we talked to him, and he got together, and he formed a group, and he got some volunteers, and he went up to the Orkney Islands, and he walked up to the sealers, and they literally ripped the rifles out of their hands and threw them in the ocean, and we created such a controversy there that we raised enough money to buy that island, and it's now a seal sanctuary, all because one person said, what can I do? And so that's where change comes about. Each and every one of us has that ability to make that change. And so that's the two things that Sea Shepherd specializes in. We're not a protest group, we're an intervention organization. We intervene against illegal activities, but we also like to feel that we're creating awareness, not just on television, but also with our volunteer base, and bringing in people and demonstrating to them firsthand that they have the power to make a difference. And I think that's worked out quite well over the last 30 years, because so many of our crew members have gone on to start their own organizations and get involved in their own campaigns, and it's been very, very successful. So thank you for the opportunity to speak here to you this evening. If anybody has any questions, I'd be quite happy to answer them. Oh, are we carbon neutral? Yeah, we sink whaling ships, and every whaling ship we sunk is another vessel not burning carbon fuel. Yeah. What do you mean? I'm not going to plant trees, I'm in the ocean. No, we save whales. And by the way, there is a study on the fact that whales actually conserve carbon, or when they in their bodies when they die. So, in fact, that's equivalent to planting a tree. Well, they believe, most people believe in fantasies. You know, on our planet, he said that when he explains it to his families and friends about biocentrism, everybody thinks he's sounding like a freak. But we live in a strange world where most people believe in the anthropocentric reality. I find it interesting that there's more subscribers to the fantasy game Warcraft than there are in active environmental organizations. Most people are living in fantasy worlds, not just on video, but religions and philosophies and everything. These are fantasies. And the real thing is to get in touch with the natural world. There's only 3 laws that we have to abide by, the 3 laws of ecology. 1, the law of biodiversity, that the strength of an ecosystem is dependent upon diversity within that ecosystem. 2, the law of interdependence, that those species are interdependent with each other. Well, here's the problem, you can tell them. They might not feel it now, but if they don't abide it, they're going to die. Yeah, so it's like a warning, you know. You either live in accordance to the laws of ecology or you die. The third law is the law of finite resources. There's a limit to growth, a limit to carrying capacity, and the only way our numbers can expand is by stealing the carrying capacity of other species. They have to go extinct for our numbers to increase. You cannot live on spaceship Earth without abiding by those regulations. We will go extinct. And for instance, the Mediterranean Sea should be taboo, which is a Polynesian term for it should be set off against fishing for 25 years. No fishing by anyone for any reason in the Mediterranean for the next 25 years, or else the Mediterranean is going to die.